December 1937. You're a young woman living in Nanjing, the capital of China. The Japanese Imperial Army is coming. You've heard rumors, whispers about what happens in the cities they took before this one, what they did to the women. But rumors are rumors, and Nanjing has walls and soldiers, and surely it won't be as bad as people are saying. It was worse. What happened in Nanjing between December 1937 and January 1938 became known as the Nanjing Massacre, the rape of Nanjing. 6 weeks that killed an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians and soldiers. 6 weeks of systematic murder, torture, and sexual violence on a scale that shocked even some of the Japanese soldiers carrying out the orders. And if you were a young woman in Nanjing during those 6 weeks, your experience was its own particular horror within the larger horror. This isn't entertainment. This is recent history. This happened 87 years ago to real women whose descendants are still alive. It deserves to be told with the honesty and weight it carries. Nanjing, in late 1937, was a city trying to hold itself together while everything around it collapsed. Japan had been at war with China since July 1937. The Japanese military had been advancing steadily, taking city after city. Shanghai had fallen after brutal fighting. Japanese forces were moving toward Nanjing. The Chinese government evacuated. Officials, military leadership, wealthy families with resources to leave, many of them got out before the Japanese arrived. What remained was ordinary people, poor people. People who couldn't afford to leave or had nowhere else to go. People who believed staying in their homes was safer than fleeing into an uncertain winter with no destination. Some foreign nationals stayed too. Western business people, missionaries, diplomats. They established something called the Nanjing Safety Zone, a designated area where civilians could shelter. They believed their foreign status and the international laws of war would provide some protection. As a young woman in Nanjing, you had to make a decision. Leave and face the dangers of the road, winter and displacement with no resources, or stay and hope the safety zone would protect you. Hope that the Japanese army would behave according to the international laws they had signed. Most women stayed. Most of them had no real choice. The Japanese army entered Nanjing on December 13th, 1937, and within hours, it became clear that hope was not going to be enough. The killings started immediately. Chinese soldiers who had surrendered were executed. Men of military age were rounded up and shot, but it didn't stay limited to soldiers. Japanese soldiers moved through the city, taking whatever they wanted and killing anyone who resisted or was simply in the way. Houses were looted, buildings were burned, bodies began appearing in the streets within the first day. For women, the terror was specific and immediate. Japanese soldiers were raping women across the city from the first hours of occupation, not as an unofficial side effect of conquest, as something that was happening openly in daylight on streets and in homes with officers present and aware. The scale of sexual violence in Nanjing was documented by the foreigners who stayed. Missionaries and business people who'd established the safety zone kept diaries and records. They reported what they witnessed and what survivors told them. Their accounts are among the most important historical records of what happened. John Rabe, a German businessman and Nazi Party member who became an unlikely protector of Chinese civilians, wrote in his diary about what he witnessed daily. His accounts describe soldiers moving through the safety zone to take women despite the zone's supposed protected status. About returning to find women who'd been taken and assaulted while he was away. About the impossibility of protecting everyone with the limited resources and authority he had. Minnie Vautrin, an American missionary at Jinling College, which had become a refuge for women, kept a diary that recorded the daily reality of trying to protect thousands of women in an increasingly desperate situation. Her accounts describe soldiers climbing walls, cutting fences, entering the compound to take women. Describe women being dragged away. Describe the screaming she heard at night from outside the compound walls. There were eyewitnesses. Their diaries and letters survived. What they recorded was happening to you. Japanese soldiers were targeting women of all ages, but specifically sought younger women. If you were young and in Nanjing in December 1937, you became a target the moment Japanese soldiers saw you. The strategies women used to try to protect themselves reveal how desperate the situation was. Women cut their hair and dressed as men or old women. They covered themselves in dirt and ash to make themselves look older and less attractive. They bound their chests. They rubbed mud on their faces. They did everything they could think of to make themselves invisible to soldiers who were hunting them. Some hid in the ceilings of buildings, in wells, in underground spaces, in piles of hay or stored goods. Women described staying in hiding for days without food or water, not moving, barely breathing, listening for footsteps. The women who made it into the refugee camps at places like Jinling College were relatively safer, but not safe. The camps were overcrowded, underfed, and constantly under threat. Soldiers came regularly demanding women. The foreigners running the camps tried to block them, argued, stood in doorways. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. Women were taken from camps in groups, taken from their hiding places when soldiers found them, taken from the streets when they had to emerge for food or water. The sexual violence wasn't random or spontaneous in the way that individual crimes of opportunity are. It was systematic, organized. Some women were taken to locations where multiple soldiers would assault them. Some were held for days or weeks. Some were killed afterward. Some were left alive. The military comfort women's system, Japan's organized system of sexual slavery that operated throughout the war, had not yet been fully established in Nanjing in December 1937. What happened there was less organized and in some ways more chaotic and therefore more immediately dangerous. There was no system. There were just soldiers in the absence of any enforcement of the laws of war. The foreigners in Nanjing documented what was happening and sent reports out to the world. Their accounts were published. Newspapers in Europe and America reported on the Nanjing Massacre. The scale of killing and the systematic sexual violence were not secrets. They were reported news. The international response was inadequate to the point of being effectively non-existent. Japan denied the reports, called them exaggerations or fabrications. The Japanese government had enough diplomatic leverage and the international community was sufficiently reluctant to confront a major military power that the denials provided cover for inaction. Western governments issued statements, expressed concern, did not intervene. The women of Nanjing were on their own. John Rabe eventually used his Nazi Party membership to write to Hitler requesting intervention, reasoning that Germany and Japan were allies and Hitler might have influence. Hitler didn't respond. Rabe was eventually ordered back to Germany, and the protection he had provided, imperfect and insufficient as it was, ended. Minnie Vautrin stayed longer. She continued documenting and protecting women until her mental health collapsed under the weight of what she had witnessed and been unable to prevent. She returned to the United States in 1940 and died by suicide in 1941. She's sometimes called the goddess of Nanjing by the Chinese people she helped. She's also a casualty of Nanjing, destroyed by whatever she witnessed there. Women who survived the 6 weeks of the Nanjing Massacre carried the experience for the rest of their lives. In Chinese society of that era, women who had been raped faced profound stigma. The violence done to them was treated as a source of shame rather than as the crime it was. Some women faced rejection from families and communities. Some were unable to marry or found their marriages destroyed. Some never spoke publicly about what had happened to them for decades. The silence itself was a consequence of the violence. Women who had survived extraordinary brutality were pressured into hiding that survival because acknowledging it brought shame onto themselves and their families rather than onto the men who had committed the crimes. Some survivors eventually spoke publicly, particularly as they aged and as international attention to the Nanjing Massacre increased in the latter decades of the 20th century. Their testimonies were collected by researchers and historians. Their accounts confirmed and extended what the foreign eyewitnesses had documented at the time. These women waited decades to be believed, waited decades for their experience to be acknowledged as historical fact rather than disputed as political claim. Some died before acknowledgement came. Some died still fighting for it. The political dispute over the Nanjing Massacre continues today. Japan and China have long had contentious arguments about the scale of what happened, the numbers killed, the nature and extent of the sexual violence. Japanese nationalist politicians have periodically denied or minimized the massacre. Chinese government and survivors' advocates are still insisting on full acknowledgement. In the middle of this political argument are the women themselves, survivors who lived through something undeniable and spent their lives being told by powerful interests that what they experienced was disputed, exaggerated, or politically motivated fabrication. The Nanjing Massacre happened 87 years ago. The last survivors are very old now. Within the next decade or two, there will be no living witnesses left. When that happens, the history will depend entirely on documents, testimonies that were recorded, and the willingness of societies to teach it honestly and completely. This matters because what happened in Nanjing is not just Chinese history or Japanese history, it's human history. It's a record of what organized military violence does to civilian populations, and specifically to women when the laws of war are not enforced, and when the international community decides that intervention is inconvenient. The women of Nanjing didn't die or suffer because of something inevitable or natural. They suffered because specific decisions were made by specific people at specific times. Decisions to allow soldiers to commit violence, decisions not to intervene by those with the power to do so, decisions to deny and minimize afterward by those with political interests in doing so. Understanding those decisions, tracing how they were made and why, is how you prevent them from being made the same way again. The women of Nanjing deserved protection they didn't receive. They deserved acknowledgement they had to fight for. They deserved a history that tells their story without flinching and without allowing political dispute to obscure what the evidence clearly shows. This is their story. It deserves to be told.